Hello and welcome to the Open Systems Media eCast, Managing the Risk of Meeting Embedded Software Certification Objectives. I'm Kurt Schwader, your moderator, with today's speakers Sean Bhattacharya from LDRA and Yurik Wallach from Polarian. Today's schedule consists of about 50 minutes of presentation, leaving 10 minutes at the end of the hour for audience Q&A. Before we begin, I'd like to run down some features of your viewing console. First is the Enlarge Slides button. This button will maximize the slides to fill your entire screen. The Download Slides button allows you to download and print the slides if you'd like a hard copy to follow along with. The button labeled Forward to a Friend enables you to send an email to someone that will include a registration link to this eCast so they can also attend. The Ask a Question text box enables you to participate in today's event. You simply type your question into the box and submit it using the Submit button. You can submit questions at any time during the presentations. We ask you to do so early and often while you're looking at the material and the question is fresh in your mind. We'll address as many of these as we can during the closing Q&A, and if you have a question pertaining to the eCast operation itself, you could submit those too, and one of our technicians will be happy to respond to you. We have two speakers today. Sean Bhattacharya is a business development manager. He began his career in factory automation, robotics, and various defense contractors, including Lockheed Martin. He finished his time with Lockheed as the Deputy IPT Director for the Mule program. He has been with LDRA since 2007 and worked closely with industry-leading integrators across an array of markets implementing security and safety-critical methodologies. He's a frequent embedded industry writer and speaker, and he works with regulators, technologists, and tools and service providers to help projects adopt methodologies in practical, scalable ways. He's an active contributor in the Future Avionics Capability Environment Standard, drives product innovation with customers, manages partnerships, and manages U.S. field teams. Our second presenter will be Yurik Wallach. He is the Vice President of Product Management for Polarian. He brings 10 years of experience in software product management and engineering. His unique mix of technical acumen and business savvy enables him to translate market needs into enterprise-grade solutions to help customers accelerate collaboration, integration, and innovation. Before joining Polarian, Yurik worked as a DisNet software employee where he had the opportunity to advance user experience and satisfaction and established a strong track record of successful products. Prior to that, he worked as a software developer and architect focusing on visionary projects based on meta-object facility standards and model-driven engineering. He holds a master's degree in mathematics from Charles University. Yurik will be kicking it off for us today. Yurik, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. So before we start with the actual agenda, let me introduce Polarian Software a bit. Polarian Software is a leading innovator in web-based requirements management, quality assurance, and application lifecycle management solutions since our first product release in 2004. We serve companies of different sizes and a very broad spectrum of industries. And I would say that the unique differentiators include the fact that the Polarian ALM is based on a single unified artifact repository that is orchestrated by a powerful workflow engine and 100 web-based solution that enables to streamline collaboration, transparency, and release predictability, as well as regulatory standard compliance. My today's agenda is quite straightforward. I would like to start with the introduction to regulatory compliance, and then we will walk through each product and application lifecycle process phase, and we will provide some practical examples. So let's introduce in general the concept of regulatory compliance. Regulatory compliance describes the goal to understand and take steps to comply with relevant laws and regulations. And due to the increasing number of regulations and need for operational transparency, organizations are increasingly adopting the use of consolidated compliance controls, so results can be met without the unnecessary duplication of effort. Today we focus on regulations related to mechatronics industries, such as automotive, medical device development, or aerospace, and the relevant standards. There are two main categories to cover. This includes the design and process control requirements and regulatory requirements related to functional safety. So what are the most appealing challenges you need to face to meet embedded software certification objectives? So it has been reported by different analysts that most of the innovation today happens not in the mechanical or hardware engineering part of a product development, but more in the actual software that is an essential part of today's product. And because of that, the regulatory standards have been expanded to incorporate these new development in system engineering. And for example, the FDA reports that the software failures are responsible for 24% of all medical device recalls. So there is definitely the need for increasing safety and security procedures. Standards also becomes more strict and demanding. Let's take as an example ISO 14971 that was released 2012 and has been already approved in the EU, but not yet in the US. And this requires the possible risks to be fully mitigated instead of as low as reasonable practicable, which removes any space for economic considerations. A common issue why it's so difficult to manage, ensure, and demonstrate the process compliance is that the teams are often using different tools. They are often geographically distributed. They use different vocabulary, different identifications, and so documenting the development without not unified processes and tools requires simply a lot of manual effort. Today we present integrated full lifecycle solutions, significantly reduce the risks and efforts, and we provide guidelines as well as practical examples how to help enhance the reliability and functionality of the safety-related and safety-critical systems. Even though we focus on embedded software development aspect today, we have not to forget about the full product lifecycle, because from a regulation point of view, the traceability refers to the completeness of the information about every step in the supply chain. So this pretty complex slide just gives a brief high-level overview how Polarion, AOM, and LDRA toolset covers the system, software, and safety development process. So you have a better understanding of our topology. We'll start with system requirements and system design being supplemented by software requirements and software design modeling. Safety process is kind of detached from system and software process here, just to highlight that it spans both system and software engineering, and that there is a lot of pressure on the actual risk mitigation. We'll also cover the development and implementation process. The verification and validation is an ongoing activity through the full lifecycle, and both our solutions provide an excellent support. So having a V-model-like process diagram from the previous slide in mind, one should ask, if you have really to stick to waterfall development, or how about the agile processes? The truth is that the V-model artifact structure is actually required, or at least preferred, by the certification authorities, but it is not really necessary to actually follow the waterfall process and specify and design the product all up front. Instead of that, we see many companies adopting the agile techniques. They focus on sprint increments, so there is a special focus on high-level tasks. We call them work packages that are being planned to the sprint to describe a verifiable and validatable software increment. And this enables more easily a continuous integration and especially verification, no matter if we speak about software components integration or integration of the code itself to the final product. The reason why this happens is also to bring more stakeholders into the game and collect early feedback related to the quality, to the intended use, any kind of feedback. By the way, Polarion AOM is certified as a trusted tool for ISO 26262 for automotive safety. And the German certification authority, TÜV Nord, claimed that we were actually the first full agile process-driven software development company that they have certified, and they found no issues with our Scrum process, as we provided a full project documentation mapped to the V-model-like artifact structure being required by the certification authority. Successful product development starts with a robust requirements management solution. There are several objectives, and of course, the first is that the requirements are being gathered and processed for all the engineering aspects, such as functional requirements, system requirements, safety and security requirements. All different needs has to be documented. But more complex is that the requirements are or should be granular enough and uniquely identified to allow other artifacts, such as design items or test protocols, test steps, to be as specific as possible. So if you have a large requirement, it would be very difficult to understand the impact on the design if you would have, too many design items being linked. One might be surprised how many companies rely on the Microsoft Office documents when writing requirement specifications. It definitely provides a great usability to express and document quickly the needs, but has very little support for granular identification and traceability. At Plurn, we provide a very, I would say, unique technology that allows you to mark more or less every single paragraph as a requirement, functional, security, performance requirement, but with the ability to edit specification in a really like a Word-like document interface. Of course, all on the web. And this interface is commonly used by domain analysts, business analysts, and requirements engineers. But at the same time, you can view the requirement specification document in a more structured, oriented view. And this is commonly being used by project managers, as they have to assign and browse additional metadata to requirements such as planning data, prioritization, or safety categorization. More interesting, objective to requirements management is that actually for every single artifact, a full and immutable change history has to be recorded, and every electronic record change needs to be documented. This has to be a fully automated process, as you cannot really take any risks in a manual control. And so that's why we decided in Plurn to actually store every single artifact, and you can fully customize a business model in a version control management repository. And it's not just the artifacts like requirements and safety procedures are documented. It's also that the process has to be versioned. This is actually also a requirement that whenever you change the process, like a workflow definition, artifact definition, you have to document this change. So we store all the information, both artifacts and process, in a single repository. More than that, it's not just a changelog, but a full concept of a time machine, so you can actually browse and search and report from any historical state. I would say that 50% of our customers still rely on the printed, so archived documentation, and so 50% of our customers really provides the online project documentation, or they export the requested documentation on demand from our time machine concept. Auditability is definitely important, so you understand who, what, and when for every single change. But a change has to be also properly isolated and managed. It means that you need to track the why request, so why the change actually happens. This is typically documented as a change request. And you need to link all the change requirements to these change requests. You have to, of course, ensure that every single change is processed like that. We spend a lot of time on actual automation and ensuring the change consistency. And we can have a look on this practical example of the workflow configuration on the chart here. that you can model a document workflow in a way that first document is being in the status draft, and it's in review, and then it's being approved. And of course, you have a very similar workflow configuration on a granular requirement level. And what's important is that you can actually link those two workflows together and really ensure the change consistency. So whenever you mark the document or send the document to review, all the low-level requirements are being sent to review as well. And of course, you can implement the consistency checks in our workflow schema that you can mark a full document as approved only if all the requirements has been approved. When speaking about approvals or signings, it's also important to say that the regulations do not just describe the requirements to the actual process, but they also describe the technology requirements. In this case, for example, when you perform the approval or signing, you have to be compatible with the FDA 21 CFR Part 11 for electronic signatures. Risks and hazard analysis typically happen simultaneously with system and software requirement specification. And so what we have seen is that risks analysis exists merely as a ROS in an Excel spreadsheet. You probably know this Excel FMEA spreadsheet documents. But in reality, the harms are repetitive with multiple potential hazards, and this leads to end-to-end relationship between harm and hazards. And the second complaint to this plain document-based risk analysis is that the corrective and preventative actions are not or should not be managed as a static spreadsheet cells. And of course, every single corrective action has to be properly modeled, traceable, and verifiable whether you have really successfully performed the mitigation procedure. On this example here, you can, for example, see how we model the standard risk and hazard analysis process. So we define different work event types like harm and hazard. There is an end-to-end relationship, so you can really link different harms with different hazards. And for each hazard, you need to plan a corrective action as a separated artifact. This can be, of course, a new functional requirement and a verification procedure. So you might mitigate the risk via planning another system requirement. And this, of course, has a different associated process, or you might have some supplier control tasks. At the end, of course, you can export all those information in a more standard FMEA-like document with pre- and post priority numbers. Speak a bit about the design, system and software design. The main objective is that the output of a design should be provided in a form that enables verification against the design input. I mean, this sounds simple, and it more or less speaks about being able to link the system requirements, design requirements, and the final code. But to understand the challenges, you need to understand that we speak about very large data scales, thousands of requirements, 50,000 of requirements, and also no matter that you might adopt some ALM tools that cover all the lifecycle phases, you need to deal with the traceability across different tools like modeling solutions. We have been already speaking about a traceability concept, about the need to have all the data being linked together, and the auditability that every single change has to be auditable. But the even more important for change management is to actually understand the impact of a change before the change actually happens. So that's, I mean, we need to provide useful views to help with the impact analysis. And once the change has been already done, we need to ensure that the change was properly propagated to all the low-level artifacts. There are pretty common industry standard solutions called as suspect links. So whenever you change a requirement, the low-level design items can be marked as suspected, so the other department is informed on possible change and they have to react. But to fully understand our positioning is that we need to also consider our other modeling tools when we speak about the system design, such as MathWorks Simulink for system modeling or Enterprise Architect, for example, for software modeling. Typically, when you would deal with the regulation standards, all what you would need to ensure is the proper traceability from the requirements to the design model. And that's, for example, supported in MATLAB Simulink via the requirements management interface. And we do support the traceability from the Simulink model to the actual requirements. But more than that, we can also publish the Simulink models, and we do the same for UML, to Polarion design specification documents, so the impact analysis can be done to some extent without actually opening the low-level design in tools like MATLAB Simulink or Enterprise Architect in terms of UML. So this significantly reduced the difficulty in the impact analysis. So next, a software development phase. We will later see, how the safety-related processes are being supported by LDRA. From Polarion point of view, the most important need is to guarantee the process consistency in a development area. We don't really care whether our customers follow the agile or waterfall process. We do support, planning of development plans. But what we are really strong at is really to model the actual development process, to model what are the high-level tasks, if these are user stories or work packages, ensure that all the low-level tasks are properly traceable, and ensure the consistency. So, for example, you can mark the user story as implemented only if all the recognized issues have been fully processed and fixed. You can also fully model in our workflow configuration the code review. We introduced the concept of a task-centric code review. This means that the code review doesn't happen immediately after the change has been committed, but we often recommend so-called task-centric review, that a developer is proactively pushing the change to the next state, so the code is being validated in chunks and not randomly after every single change. We do provide traceability to the source code. So, what is mandated is that every single change in the actual code is traceable to the implementation task, from implementation task to the design item, and from design item to the system requirement. I was already saying that the verification and validation aspect needs to be continuous, and we do support the continuous integration concepts and continuous verifications. And often, what I see is a kind of the confusion of what is actually required from the quality technology with respects of verification and validation. The traceability is sometimes recognized as an ability to link requirements and test cases together, but I would say that it's more appropriate to say that the need of traceability is not just to provide a link, but really to provide an evidence that requirements have been implemented and verified. It means that it's not just enough to show that there is a linked test case to a requirement, but really to give a proof that the test case was actually executed and passed for all your applicable platforms. We do see that our customers are using multiple testing tools. We provide, support for manual testing procedures. We do have automated tests, but we have a broad set of integration with various testing tools. And that's very important because what we want to guarantee is that every single testing procedure has been really processed in the same way. So no matter if there is an issue recognized by the static source code analysis procedure, or if there is a hardware in the loop test that fails, all those issues needs to appear in a one single place and assigned to developers as soon as possible, because as you know, it significantly reduced the cost on actual fix. Some of the highlights to our Polarion solutions that our customers are especially highlighting is first the transparency. Easy of use. I think that's very essential if you understand that you need to deal with a very large data set, that every single operation needs to be performed as fast as possible. And efficiency. You want to automate all the traceability aspects, all the process consistency checks, and you can adopt those automation continuously, and so you can actually modify your process that is fully versioned with Polarion and adopt more automation while you use Polarion. So that's the time when I would like to pass the presentation to Sean, and he would tell you more about the verification and all the aspects related to the safety regulations and the software development.
Thank you, Yuri. Thank you, Kurt, and thank you for joining us. We've got a nice picture of what's going on earlier in the life cycle, from requirement solicitation and traceability and so on. And now we're going to walk and getting right into design and so on, and we're going to get into more on the implementation side, low-level tests, high-level tests, structural coverage, all the stuff that you do a little bit further along the life cycle. You may have noticed that Yuri had a little timeline up there on some of his slides. We're going to keep walking down that timeline. But before we get started on that timeline, let's take a little bit of a look at LDR as a company and the technology and the industries that we're really focusing on here, and the standards that really drive that high level of reliability. So we've been around for about 40 years, and we've been heavily participating in these standards, such as DIR 178B, MISRA, CERT, now the FACE Future Avionics standard. And what it's basically taught us, as these members you can see that have been on these standards, what it's taught us is the level of rigor, the richness and methodology that's required to really meet these levels of reliability. It's not just a computer science piece of technology. It's not just a bit of automation. It's not just looking at any particular stage of the process with a lot of care, but it's rather all of that, and in the context of that particular industry, particular standard. So. And we gathered this information as a lot of these standards do come out of the U.S., yet others came out of Europe. For instance, Senelec or 61508 had its roots in Europe, and we're seeing the changes coming from 26262 coming from India and Europe and the U.S. at the same time. So it's really important not only to stay plugged into the standards bodies, but really get sort of an international perspective on how these standards are being interpreted, how different regulatory authorities are expecting these standards and their artifacts to be submitted, so that so that somebody who builds a UAV in the U.S. and has certification documents for DO 178 can then go to South America or Europe and go through a similar type of certification approval so they can fly that UAV in that space. So it really takes a global perspective on the trajectory of these standards and understanding how these types of industry, these safety-critical, embedded real-time industries are really affecting us. So, for instance, the amount of software in planes are doubling at a really, really rapid rate, and things like the Boeing 787's flushing system in the restroom it requires very, very high levels of reliability because it's moving water around the vehicle, rebalancing weight in the vehicle. In the automotive industries, changes are coming at a rapid rate. Blind spot detection, 360 views, electric steering, and of course we're always reading about Google driving their cars around and which states are making that legal. So you can see tremendous amounts of 50, 100 million lines of code per car changing very, very quickly in little 18-month cycles across multiple vehicles and their full variants of vehicles. And similarly, this applies to industrial controls as it always has, but again, this amount of software is growing very rapidly. In medical devices, and we're seeing a great deal of growth as with implantables and radiation therapy and so on. So the need to build and get products rapidly to market cost-effectively with these ridiculously high levels of reliability. I mean, some of these are 10 to the minus 9th number of defects per operating hour. Require us to really understand these standards, implement them properly, and implement them efficiently so we can get through meeting them as well as doing it at a reasonable cost and time frame. So for every one of these standards, these are the big ones, a lot of derivatives of them are used, and for instance, DO 178 and versions of it are brought into space and in the Army and DoD period. So these standards and their variants really set the bar, and each of these standards have these various safety integrity levels. So they have to do with the probability of failure, how many hours of operation there will be, the amount of pain and suffering and cost, effectively, when a failure does rise, and those are all amalgamated in, and analysis is done at the system scope to determine the software integrity level, the design assurance level required for these standards. And once that's done, an approach given each of these standards' objectives is then brought into the picture. So if you are familiar with DO 178 and you've read the standard for commercial avionics, you've gone to the back of the standard and you've probably seen a bunch of tables. Those tables are the ones that are finally used for the audit process through various control gates of the life cycle of the program. So in commercial avionics, you have stage of involvement audits, SOI 1 through 4, which check to see that you've written your plans and your development plan and your PSAC, Software Aspects of Certification, Plan for Software Aspects of Certification, and other planning documents properly up front. The latter stages of involvement to make sure that you're executing to that plan correctly, and finally at the end, you prove that you've completed it, provided the artifacts showing that you met the plan and the plan traces the standard correctly. Now that typical approach, whether you're doing traceability or reviewing planning documents, you're analyzing code for structural coverage against requirements-based tests or whatnot, that similar approach goes across these industries. Different levels of rigor, different nuances in different parts of the methodologies, but ultimately they all take the same level of approach. The audit mechanisms are a little bit different, but ultimately it's the same concept. So just to give you a sense, since Yuri and our friends from Polarian are working with us to define this larger scope solution that will take you from cradle to grave, which parts of that are really handled by two different sets of tools. So, the requirements management, elicitation, FMEA, safety, document generation from the requirement standpoint, a lot of that's being handled by Polarian. And as you're getting further down the life cycle and you get into the LDRA verification tools, you have basically TB Manager, which is a verification workflow engine, bringing in the requirements and then dispersing them for verification. But then you have the hardcore computer science stuff, the parts that are actually analyzing your code, instrumenting your code, running it on the target, getting data back, behavior, pass, fail, and so on, measuring metrics with respect to software, and then bringing those requirements, bringing those artifacts together so you can see how you're tested, you can see how your structural coverage went, you can look at your requirements again in Polarian, rerun those tests or modify those tests until you're satisfied with how well you've vetted out your system, and then you can aggregate all those artifacts together to cover the entire life cycle. So we're going to cover some of these subjects, the specific topics that really drive our problems in this space. And then the first problem is traceability. I mean, we're talking the higher the design assurance level, the greater the granularity for traceability is necessary, right? So your low-level requirements are really written at a low level in DO 178. So you can do a one-to-one or one-to-few or few-to-one mapping all the way down to source code. And then you have tests across the right side of the V model for both the higher level tests and the low level tests and so on. So it requires you to really have a very, very granular, well-knit, well-hung together, so to speak, specification tree. And as things change upstream and downstream, identifying suspect links, knowing what to retest and rerun, trying to take advantage of all this infrastructure of traceability, and keeping track of all this trace data, that becomes very costly and risky. Mistakes in that traceability can be very, it can hurt you a lot in the audit process, obviously, but then it can, in turn, affect the system's behavior greatly. A little bit of mistakes in traceability, you can end up testing and building the wrong brick, a good brick for the wrong house, in effect. Right? So the magic in traceability is if you're able to go see high-level requirements, lower-level requirements, all the way to design-level requirements, all inside of one ecosystem, and down to the source code, down to the test, it lets you have this phenomenal transparency. You may be in negotiations with a program manager and they want to move some UI piece from one part of the vehicle to another, and then you're quickly able to hone in on the system level requirements that are affected and see all the way down to the code and see what it affects, even the testing, and do a rapid impact analysis and be in a lot better negotiation position, for instance. So these benefits that come with traceability and transparency are not always clear up front. But once you get used to taking advantage of all of that data and keeping up all that data, they can be extremely useful at lots of stages in the life cycle. So as, of course, you're tracing down the low-level requirements, the other pieces that have happened in the other phenomenon in the embedded safety-critical space is the adoption of model-driven design, right? So in automotive, in medical devices, in commercial avionics, models have made their way into our lives, and a lot of them are generating source code, concerns about managing traceability, linking to models and different tools, the quality of the generated code, how easy it may or may not be able to be tested, how tests that are done in models are going to be interpreted by the verification authorities, how those tests can be reused further down those life cycles. These are the questions that have really sort of bubbled up over the last several years. And in several industries, you know, those authors of the guidances and the certification authorities have made a great deal of effort to address those concerns. And what's effectively happened is that modeling is now part of that verification process, and verification is done as much in the model as it is done later in the life cycle. So engineers are building algorithms, they're wringing them out, they're pumping signal data into Simulink, they're animating UML diagrams, they're generating code from it, and then they're able to push those tests down to tools like LDR-ATB run and so on, and rerun those tests on target hardware, and verifying that when the rubber meets the road, the stuff that happened in my beautiful modeling environment is actually happening when the bits are flipping, and we get asynchronous I/O, and we have all these different time-constrained and timing-constrained environments. So So as that's being brought in, the question becomes how do you trace requirements, design elements, low-level written requirements down to code. And the nice thing about the Polarian and LDRA collaboration is that we are able to open up the source code and, so to speak, and the lowest part of your specification tree, which would show traceability to that source code, and basically be able to drag and drop and do that mapping, so that you're not constrained to having to copy over a function prototype and put it in a column in a spreadsheet or a requirements management tool, or take an ID from a requirement and put it in as a comment in your code, and then have to track all that extra data as things change. The idea is that when you're able to sort of drag and drop visually and have the tool manage that data, when you do see that change, suspect links are easily automatically identified, and you can scope down that peephole and not have to try to deal with all those suspect links, and just focus on the change and see how that affects change in code, how that affects change downstream further in tests, and so on. But it requires building the connector technologies to these various tools that house our modeling technology and that houses our source code. So you're able to get views like this, where you have source code on the requirements on the left and all the way down to source code on the right, and you're very quickly able to hone in on what code actually changed when XYZ requirement changed, review those appropriate requirements, review that appropriate code, run your reanalysis, run your regression tests, and then review those results against those changes only, and those types of things. And one thing that really came out of DO-178C and the latest incarnation of a lot of these standards are this term of bidirectional traceability. So any one of us who've worked in the CMMI universe or in any of these embedded safety critical systems, we know that we need to produce traceability matrices from each level of requirements down to its more granular decomposed instance, and then down to the code and up through tests and so on. Now, what these standards have come up with is saying that, yes, you have an intended behavior of the system at a high level, but a lot of low-level requirements, some low-level requirements come out of the testing process, the implementation process itself. So something that's tied to the OS, or something that's tied to the hardware and some timing and so on, and you need to create a low-level requirement to test that behavior. Well, in DO-178 terms, they're called derived requirements, ones that are derived out of that implementation. And those require tests, and those require that those tests get the right amount of code coverage, for instance. So this bidirectional traceability is intended to highlight the analysis from the opposite direction, from the down direction up. And then when you're able to bring requirements, code, test inside of one ecosystem, that bidirectional traceability and that analysis is very intuitive. It's very natural. You don't find yourself having to scroll through a whole lot of tables trying to find things that haven't been linked up thoroughly. And these particular problems, these gaps naturally fall out because the tools give you that kind of transparency. Now, of course, when you're trying to bring a system together in the embedded space, you have to integrate with some chip in a box, and you're working with a cross compiler, and maybe you're running an RTOS, maybe you're not, and you have to talk to that box with a UART controller or a debugger or whatever type of I/O you have available. You have to deal with this huge ecosystem of engineering content and tool stacks and so on. So the importance is to be able to integrate all these together in an automated environment. And you and I all know, we've all worked in the embedded space, more than likely everything is a little custom. Everything is a little different in the embedded world. So you need the tooling that has the flexibility to be able to kind of latch in and have an Eclipse plugin or a NetBeans plugin, be able to use the Greenhouse cross compiler or the Wind River or GCC, work on 8-bit targets or multi-core with integrated modular avionics, and be able to support that variety. So let's move along those objectives a little bit more into the computer science part of our world here. Coding standards, it's a very vital part of these certification standards and their objectives. So none of them come out and say you must use a coding standard, but the verbiage is very, very close to that, and that's basically the approach that's taken. The DO-178 says you'll need to use have uniformly designed and implemented code. 26262 suggests the use of a coding standard, even recommends the idea of a MISRA as an example. But when you selected it, tailored it, applied it, run it, the results from it need to be brought back in and shown that they're meeting those objectives. And that's part of the sort of process traceability that goes along with requirements and behavior traceability. But applying a coding standard and these types of control gates such as coding standards also buys you a lot of benefits later in the process. So if your cyclomatic complexity is much lower and you tend to make things a lot easier to test. You often don't put in a defect to begin with instead of having to root it out at later parts of the life cycle. So there's a lot of benefits. The code is a lot easier to read, and during peer reviews you focus a lot more on higher levels of thinking instead of things like commas and tab spaces and things like that. So, and the coding standards can come right off the shelf off an industry standard, or you can tailor it to what makes the most sense for your particular organization. Maybe you're doing some auto-generated code, maybe you've got some legacy code to deal with, and so on. Well, after you get through that part of the standard, that part of the control gate of the process, you usually go into unit tests, where you're building individual functions and so on and testing them out against low-level requirements. So at that stage, you want to have a requirements-driven low-level test to make sure those detailed design elements or low-level requirements are being verified against the functions and procedures that implement that behavior. So you're wringing out expected behavior at the low level, but at the same time, as you'll see, you'll be getting structural coverage of that code. So you'll be able to see, am I really covering all of that code? If I'm not covering all of that code, what's some of that code doing there, and so on. And as you build up these pools of low-level tests, you're able to regress them through continuous integration and get a lot of credit towards your certification objectives. And then, of course, the crux of this is when you're doing this testing, whether you're doing it at a high level or you're doing it at a low level, which means functional tests in the hardware in the loop or down at the unit test level, for instance. The key is for a given requirements-driven test, what kind of structural coverage are you getting? Are you exercising all of that code? And if you're not, why is that code there? Is that code there and not being executed because your test isn't robust enough to get to those corner cases? Does that code need to be removed? Does that mean that your requirements decomposition is not rich enough so that some of that implementation has not properly been captured in requirements? Where is the hole in your process? But when you start to triangulate requirements, test, and implementation through structural coverage in runtime, then it forces you to draw a noose around your system, your process, and ensure that the expected behavior is actually in the system. And there's no way to escape it. You know, if you have 100% structural coverage and your requirements are properly traced down to your code and your tests are properly tracing your requirement, you're almost certainly building what you expect to build in your requirements. So that process in its entirety, whether it's being done at the high level, as you're seeing in these HLTs, these high-level tests verifying these high-level requirements, or at the low level with what we just described, maybe even at the unit-level tests, those two sets of tests, along with structural coverage, is what really gets the job done. Usually what happens is you have SRS level or SRD level sets of tests, requirements that are tested at that functional level, and along with instrumented code, you get a significant amount of such structural coverage. And you continue to add in more and more tests and refine your requirements and your implementation until you typically get to a point of diminishing returns. And then additional tests can be added at the low level to sort of plug those holes. Now, it depends on your process. You may start out with a low-level test to get your structural coverage and then use the high-level test to verify the high-level behavior, or you may have those two inverted. But these two together is absolutely essential for meeting the objectives for these types of standards. And structural coverage as a whole is a very painful process. I mean, you may find 30–40% of your life cycle in software development. Entire life cycle is spent doing structural coverage work. And when you're doing something like DO 178 level A, you know, sometimes 70–80% of your verification time in the life cycle can be verification alone. So being able to be as transparent with it automate as well as possible, integrate as well as possible with the tool stack involved is essential. So in this case, you can see that call graphs and flow graphs and colored code and summaries all play roles to quickly highlight the areas that need close examining, and then the following ensuing analysis that goes along with requirements and tests highlight what can be then done to get additional structural coverage. So a couple of points that will come up for every one of these standards. It's either the term data coupling, control coupling, or data flow and control flow. And they really have to do with ensuring that the design and the expected design are one and the same based on how data is calling itself throughout the system and how functions are coupled together throughout the system. And it's a part of analysis. It's part of the verification analysis, which is a little nebulous. There's a lot of confusion about it in the industry, but ultimately they do require it. And it's a very time-consuming process. So the more of this kind of analysis that can be automated, whether it's data flow, control flow, or data coupling, control coupling, the better. And they're, of course, to be included into the review process. And so as you go through these different control gates, static analysis, structural coverage, low and high-level tests, data coupling, control coupling, other reviews that you may be doing, those artifacts can then be fed into the set of objectives for any one of these standards. So you're collecting along the artifacts as you go, not at a pizza party a weekend before you have to go through an audit, but you understand how you're doing against these control gates at the audit level much earlier in the process and identify gaps early, identify sloppy contributors early, so that when you're getting towards the end of that life cycle, you can start to aggregate artifacts and you know that you're 98% of the way there and things have been well vetted out, and it gives a nice infrastructure for the actual internal and external audits. So what you're seeing here is a vision of requirements and tests in Polarian, and those requirements then being brought down into TV Manager on the window on the bottom right, and you can see that specific requirements, verification tasks, and tests are being done in the pane on the left against the code in the pane on the right, and then those tests and their pass-fail results are being brought back into Polarian. So two systems that are really handling two parts of the workflow and two parts of the life cycle at two scopes, but properly integrated together, give you that granularity from a tester's perspective and from a requirements engineering and certification perspective at once. And ultimately what that gets you is that you're able to get to compliance earlier, you're able to get your product out the door faster, you're able to plan for multiple variants of your product. If you're working with a distributed team with verification folks in India, designers in Europe, maybe some implementation folks in the US, and trying to bring it all together and maintain this rigor, that you'll be able to do this in this kind of a collaborative environment. And, of course, be able to get through it quickly, because we know how important time to market is nowadays, especially as these certification objectives are rolling into these more consumer-type environments such as automotive. Yuri, do you have anything to add on this front?
Yeah, there is a lot to be added, but I would like more to focus on the actual questions from our audience. I think we received a great question, so let's just, first answer the questions.
Okay, great. So thanks a lot. We'll head right in. Yuri, let's start with you. There's a question about what validation and verification methods are most used and why. Does it vary from industry to industry?
Yes, especially what we definitely see is that regarding the validation and verification methods is related to the agile adoption. So what we see is that more and more customers are adopting the agile techniques, and one of the techniques is definitely the kind of the more exploratory testing methods. So this is slowly being also adopted by embedded software developers. Then what we definitely see with regards of test automation is that the people do not rely on the one single vendor. I mean, of course, there are very strong testing solutions and verification solutions, and this includes LDRA. But what we definitely see is that the customers using broad spectrum of these tools. And they need this kind of the common platform to manage all the results.
I see. Okay.
Yep.
Very good. Sean, does the LDRA tool suite solution support DO-178B and DO-178C?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we do. We were actually we have two members of were on the DO-178C committee, and the member of one of the co-chairs of the DO-331 or DO-330 rather, the tool qualification standard actually works on our certification services group and updated all of our qualification packages. We support the object code verification for a traceability to assembly level code for DO-178C. We have methodologies and techniques built into our technology for DO-332 and the object-oriented supplement, and we have integrations with modeling tools throughout that allow us to regress tests that are done at the model level down at the target, which is a big part of DO-331, the model-driven supplement. So absolutely, we've got the bases covered.
Okay, great. Yuri and Sean, we'll start with Yuri. Sean, maybe you follow up. We've got some questions. You did a great job talking about the problems and the solutions. There are some questions relating to exactly what kind of products Polarian and LDRA have with respect to this. Is it a licensed software that they buy? Do you provide consulting services to implement some of the processes, those kinds of things?
Okay, this is a great general question. I would say that we really try to provide AON solution as a product. So we don't. We try to make our AON solution in a way that it doesn't require heavy services to deploy it. We speak about rollouts that is performed in weeks, not months, as being proved by our existing clients. We have a very flexible licensing model, so you can just deploy the full AON solution or just a subset like Polarian requirements just for requirements management or Polarian QA for quality assurance management. So it's really pretty flexible. Regarding services, of course, we provide also services related to actual configuration or rollout, but also we have the out-of-the-box templates for different standards like ISO 26262 or medical standards, and we help customers to actually set up the processes for those regulatory standards.
Okay, very good. Sean, what about the LDRA products? How do they fit in? Are they licensed? Do you provide services with them?
Sure. Yes, they are licensed. We're a software tool vendor, so you purchase the software, you download it on your system, you load your code in there, bring your requirements in, trace them and test them, and so on. But we do provide a series of services that go along with different stages of the life cycle. So somebody to help integrate with your target, or somebody to work with bringing your requirements and traceability to tests and things like that. But along with that, we also have a certification services division, which are designated engineering representatives to the FAA and others who help actually make sure they work on the find or show side of compliance with our customers, and they work closely with the tool vendor, the tool side of our organization, to make sure things are harmonized. The processes that are being defined up front from a regulation standpoint, from an internal process documentation standpoint, are then in turn being implemented and configured in the tools downstream so that the artifacts produced at the end are conformant to the standards defined up front.
Okay, here's a good question for Yuri. In terms of the product, how do you integrate your software with other tools that may extend the workflow? Like this example says the customer just has requirements in QA, but the development is outsourced and they have their own solutions. Can you integrate in that kind of environment?
Yep, that's pretty often. That we cover all the LA lifecycle management phases, but sometimes the adoption of our technology is incremental. It's part of the requirements management process or quality assurance process, and the R&D department are using different tools. We do have a very flexible API to provide integration with various different other tools, but we also do have the different out-of-the-box integrations with popular development and quality assurance tools, as well as some integrations provided by the third-party vendors. So yes, I mean, we do integrate very well with other tools for R&D or for quality assurance.
Okay, Sean, is it kind of similar for the LDRA tools as well?
Yes, that's right. So you know, our TV Manager tool, for instance, can bring in results from other tools, and it's an open interface to be able to bring data in. And also, all of our tests, our analysis engine, they also have a command line interface. So if you want to plug in the execution of LDRA tools into something else, for instance, Polarian, take an execution or regression of all of our unit tests into Polarian or into Jenkins or some sort of a continuous integration environment, they can just be pulled right back in. And in today's world, you know, the tool vendors that win out there have to be able to play with huge ecosystems of technologies upstream and downstream from where they stand. So we've built all that technology and extensibility into our tools.
Okay, great. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our eCast today. I want to thank Sean and Yuri for sharing your expertise on insights on embedded software certification environments. We at Open Systems Media, LDRA, and Polarian also want to thank you, the audience, for attending today and contributing those excellent questions remotely. This eCast will be posted online at the URL shown on your screen within 24 hours, and an audio-only podcast version will also be made available there. You can do a web search with the keywords embedded space e-cast and find all of Open Systems Media eCasts available for download as MP3s. Thank you for attending, and have a great day.